David sat at his desk, the hum of the office filling the silence. It was a gray Tuesday afternoon, and the rain drizzled down outside, casting a soft glow through the windows. He glanced at the clock, 3:17 p.m. He'd been watching it tick for the past 10 minutes, but the minutes never seemed to move fast enough. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, but his mind was elsewhere, on her. Always on her. Catherine. She was his manager, his superior, the woman he admired from a distance. Every morning, he watched her walk into the office, a vision of efficiency and grace. She greeted everyone with a polite smile, but it was always brief, always professional. She never once looked at David the way he wished she would. She never lingered, never noticed the way he always kept his distance, a carefully constructed wall of respect, so she wouldn't know just how deeply he felt about her. David had always been a quiet man, the kind who observed the world more than he interacted with it. He was in his 40s now, and though he'd had relationships before, none had come close to what he felt for Catherine. He had worked in the same company for nearly 15 years, and she had been his manager for the last 3. But in all that time, she had never once looked his way, at least, not in a way that made him believe she saw him as anything other than just another employee. His colleagues had no idea. They saw the stoic, composed David, the man who got his work done without complaint, who always followed the rules and never asked for anything more. They saw him as reliable, dependable, but never more than that. To them, David was a part of the background, a fixture in the office, always quietly working. They didn't know how he spent his nights, lying awake in bed, thinking about Catherine, wondering if she ever thought about him, if she ever saw him at all. The elevator dinged, and David's heart skipped a beat. Catherine. She was walking down the hall toward her office, her heels clicking on the tile with a rhythmic precision. David looked up, pretending to focus on his screen as she passed by, but his eyes couldn't help but follow her. He saw the way her hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, the way she carried herself, so poised, so confident. Everything about her made him ache. For a moment, he allowed himself to imagine a world where things were different. A world where Catherine saw him. Where she didn't walk by without a glance, without even a word. Where she didn't look past him like he was invisible. Where he wasn't just the man who sat in the cubicle 3 desks down, the one who quietly did his job and left at the end of the day, never daring to ask for anything more. He had known it was foolish, this quiet longing he harbored for her. She was out of his league, too smart, too driven, too perfect for someone like him. And yet he couldn't shake it. He couldn't stop the way his chest tightened every time she spoke. Her voice was calm, controlled, but it had this warmth to it that David longed to hear more of. And when she laughed, it was like a melody, soft and genuine. He had heard it a few times, but never directed at him. It was always when she spoke to someone else, when they made her smile. David sighed and rubbed his temples. He needed to focus. He needed to get through the day. But it was so hard when she was so close, when the air felt thick with the weight of his unspoken feelings. It was nearing the end of the workday when Catherine came over to his desk. David looked up, startled. She was standing there, holding a file in her hands, her brow furrowed in concentration. "David, I need you to take a look at this report. There's an error in the numbers I can't quite pinpoint. Can you help me with it?" David blinked, unsure if he had heard her correctly. Catherine needed his help? He swallowed hard and nodded, trying to keep his voice steady. "Of course," he said, quickly standing and walking over to her. She handed him the report, her fingers brushing against his ever so briefly. It felt like an electric jolt to his chest, and he forced himself to breathe normally, to remain calm. "Thank you," she said, her smile genuine but still distant. It wasn't the smile he longed for, the one that could make him feel seen. But it was a smile, and that was something. David took the report and began to study it, his eyes scanning the numbers. He was hyper-aware of her presence beside him, of the way she smelled faintly of lavender and fresh linen. Her scent filled his senses, making it harder to concentrate. He focused on the report, though, not trusting himself to speak, afraid of revealing how badly his heart was beating. "Here," he said, pointing to a column. "There's an inconsistency in the second-to-last row. It's a typo. The numbers don't match." Catherine leaned over to look, and for the first time, their arms brushed, her skin warm against his. David's breath caught in his throat, and he quickly stepped back, praying she hadn't noticed his discomfort. "Ah, yes. That's it," she said with a relieved sigh. "Thank you, David. I knew I could count on you." And then, just as quickly as she had come, she was gone, walking back to her office, leaving him standing there, the lingering warmth of her presence still on his skin. That evening, David sat at his desk alone, his work done for the day. He looked at the clock, 6:10 p.m. He was the only one left in the office. He could hear the soft hum of the fluorescent lights overhead, and the quiet sound of his own breathing. He had hoped for a sign, for something more than what he had just experienced, but it was clear, Catherine would never see him the way he saw her. He stood up, grabbed his coat, and headed for the door. As he passed her office, he glanced inside. Catherine was sitting at her desk, still working, her face illuminated by the glow of her computer screen. David took a deep breath and, without thinking, walked past her door. He didn't stop. He never would.